There's a moment in awakening when the mind freezes mid-thought, and you realize the voice speaking inside you was never yours to begin with. It reacts before you decide, it judges before you consent, it narrates a life you never consciously authored. What if that inner commentary isn't identity at all, but an echo pretending to be you? Break that illusion, and the entire architecture of suffering begins to collapse. Stay awake, listen differently. A forbidden question rises before anything else. If respect fades quietly, why does the voice in your mind pretend you didn't see it happening? The echo inside tries to rewrite the story, smoothing over every moment you shrank yourself to keep the peace. Yet the mirror doesn't lie. It shows the subtle tilt of power every time you answered instantly, apologized first, or explained what no one asked to hear. And beneath that mirror sits the truth you've been avoiding. The smallest behaviors reveal the loudest truths. There's a strange tension that appears when you watch the mind replay these micro moments. You notice how quickly the inner voice excuses others and blames you for expecting basic reciprocity. It rushes to defend habits you never consciously chose. And in that rush, another presence starts to feel separate, the one that sees the pattern instead of drowning in it. That quiet split is the first sign something deeper is going on. Pressure builds as you realize these behaviors weren't random. They were signals you never meant to send. The inner voice insists they were harmless, yet the body remembers every time availability felt like obligation. The more you examine it, the clearer it becomes. Respecting yourself was never the problem. Convincing your own mind you deserved it was. The tension isn't external. It's between the echo that pleads and the awareness that observes. A moment of stillness reveals the paradox. You didn't choose the instinct to over-explain or soften your boundaries. The thoughts simply arrived, like shifts in the wind. And every time they arrived, you followed. Watching this unfold feels like standing at the edge of a portal, one side repeating old scripts, the other asking who created them. The mind behaves, the awareness witnesses, and the gap between them becomes impossible to ignore. That gap asks the question you can't escape. If you never chose these signals, who did? The modern world wraps itself in soft language, kindness, empathy, positivity, yet anyone paying close attention can feel the undercurrent humming beneath it. There's a quiet competition running under every interaction, a subtle game of posture and perception. People perform confidence, curate identities, and signal value like merchants in an invisible marketplace. And while the surface glows with warmth, the deeper rhythm reveals something sharper. Respect follows boundaries, not slogans. A strange dissonance appears when the inner voice tries to believe in this kindness culture, while your experience tells a different story. You've seen how the loudest seem admired, how the emotionally generous get drained, how those who ask for nothing are treated like they need nothing. The voice tries to soften this truth, but awareness catches the pattern in its raw form. It feels like watching two layers of reality running at once, the polite script and the silent hierarchy beneath it. People instinctively lean toward what appears self-sufficient because strength whispers what words can't. The person who doesn't grasp for approval creates a gravitational field others can feel without explanation. Meanwhile, the one who over-accommodates becomes strangely invisible. This isn't cruelty, it's psychology. Humans calibrate their respect based on perceived autonomy, not expressed goodness. And the more you notice this, the harder it becomes to unsee. Behind every interaction lies a hidden exchange, who adjusts, and who remains unmoved. The one who bends too quickly loses shape in the eyes of others. The one who holds their center becomes a point of reference. It's why boundaries speak louder than kindness, why consistency earns more weight than compliments, why detachment reads as confidence even when it isn't. The world honors what doesn't flinch. That's the unspoken rule no one teaches out loud. And here's the edge of the next revelation. If respect follows independence, what happens when someone senses you no longer need validation at all? Pause, and watch what shifts next. Something powerful happens when you finally see the pattern. people don't respect you because they like you, they respect you because they sense you can walk away. This truth sits beneath every friendship, every romance, every social dynamic. When someone feels you need their approval to stay, the balance collapses instantly. But when your presence is a choice rather than a plea, the entire atmosphere around you changes. People become careful with access they know isn't guaranteed. There's an unsettling clarity in noticing how the inner voice reacts to this. It panics, insisting connection requires constant proving. Yet another layer of awareness watches calmly as the mind tries to negotiate for affection it should never have had to earn. These two forces collide like waves, revealing how dependency distorts perception. Respect cannot survive where desperation begins, and the body knows it long before the mind admits it. Think of how human behavior shifts around someone who radiates quiet sufficiency. People speak slower, choose their words with more intention, and hesitate before overstepping. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Autonomy signals strength. The less you cling, the more others pay attention. The moment someone senses you're not anchored to their validation, the dynamic resets. Suddenly, they're the ones wondering if they measure up. This awareness stings at first. You start recalling every time you held on too tightly, every moment you tried to secure connection by giving more than was asked. But the deeper insight is liberating. Respect grows when you stop performing for acceptance. When the mind no longer chases reassurance, your energy becomes still, and that stillness is magnetic. Walking away isn't a threat, it's a posture that says, I choose myself first. And that leads to the next question waiting in the doorway. If autonomy creates respect, what happens when you control not just your presence, but your availability itself? Stay with this. When you look closely at how people assign value, you'll notice something almost uncomfortable. Respect rises and falls with the scarcity of your time. The moment your availability becomes automatic, something subtle collapses. You stop being perceived as someone with a life, priorities, or momentum of your own, and you become an adjustable fixture in someone else's schedule. It's not malice, it's human nature. What's always accessible feels less precious, even if no one says it aloud. Watch the inner voice struggle with this truth. It wants to believe that generosity, flexibility, and constant presence make relationships stronger. But awareness sees the hidden cost. Every time you rearranged your plans, answered instantly, or stayed on call emotionally, you taught others you had no boundary they needed to honor. The tension between what you intended and what they perceived becomes almost palpable, like a faint vibration in the background of every memory. People instinctively calibrate their behavior around what feels scarce. When you become more selective, not dramatic, not withholding, just intentional, the dynamic changes instantly. Requests become more thoughtful. Interruptions become rare. Even casual conversations gain weight because your time now carries contour instead of dissolving on demand. You become the person others adjust to, not away from. This is the quiet shift from servant energy to sovereign energy. And scarcity doesn't require distance. It requires choice. When you choose when to engage instead of responding reflexively, you signal something powerful. Your world doesn't pause for anyone. That signal creates a halo effect. People begin to sense you have direction, structure, and purpose, and respect flows toward that naturally. Availability stops being a reflex and becomes a currency. And here's the doorway opening now. If your time has this much influence, imagine what your silence does. Silence unnerves people in ways they rarely admit. The moment you stop filling every gap with reassurance or explanation, something in the room tightens. Others start revealing themselves just to escape the discomfort they feel. They talk faster, justify more, fill the air with details you never asked for, while you remain still. Silence becomes the mirror they cannot escape, and the reflection unsettles them. That tension alone shifts how they see you. Inside your own mind, the voice protests. It urges you to clarify, soften, Smooth the edges so no one misinterprets your quiet. But awareness notices something else. The less you say, the more truth you hear. People unintentionally expose their motives, their insecurities, their power plays. Your restraint becomes a kind of soft pressure that no one can quite name. The echo phrase rises, silence reveals. Silence also makes your presence heavier, almost gravitational. When you speak rarely and intentionally, people lean in without realizing it. They assume meaning, depth, and stability because your words aren't diluted. Even a raised eyebrow or a calm pause hits harder than a long explanation. This isn't manipulation, it's psychology. Humans respect what they cannot easily read, and silence makes you unreadable in the best way. But the real power lies in emotional silence. When others expect a reaction and you offer none, they lose access to the script they were trying to control. Their frustration shows, their tactics unravel, and their confidence wavers. Your calm quietness becomes the immovable point in the conversation, the anchor no one can push. The second echo phrase settles in, silence holds. And that raises the next uncomfortable question. If silence reshapes the entire dynamic, what happens when someone finally hits a boundary you never announce, only enforce? Most boundaries don't fail because they were unclear, they fail because nothing happened when someone crossed them. People learn you through your reactions, not your explanations. When disrespect meets no consequence, the mind of the other person updates instantly. This line isn't real. And once a boundary is perceived as imaginary, every future interaction bends around that assumption. Respect dissolves quietly, as if sinking into the floor. Inside, the inner voice tries to negotiate. It whispers reasons to overlook the slight, rationalizes the behavior, or convinces you that enforcing a consequence will seem dramatic. Yet awareness watches this mental scramble with a calm detachment. It sees that every unaddressed moment becomes a silent permission slip. The tension grows between the part of you that wants peace and the part that knows peace without boundaries is just self-abandonment. A boundary truly exists only when it's felt. Not through speeches, warnings, or moral arguments, but through a sudden shift in access. Maybe you respond less. Maybe you stop rearranging yourself. Maybe you pull your emotional energy back without ceremony. These quiet consequences travel faster than words. People recalibrate because the cost of misbehavior becomes tangible, even if unspoken. Respect forms in that recalibration. Think about how quickly the atmosphere changes when someone realizes your presence is not guaranteed. Their tone softens. Their requests shrink. Their awareness sharpens. It's not fear, it's recognition. You've communicated, without saying a single line, that your well-being outranks their convenience. This is the moment when people finally understand the boundary, not because you explained it, but because they felt its edge. And now a deeper door swings open. If boundaries are only real when consequences are quiet, what happens when you reveal less and remove the map others use to control you? If this is hitting close to home, take a second, like the video, subscribe, and stay with me. Most people reveal far more than they realize. A single vulnerable comment, an impulsive confession, a rushed explanation, each one becomes a breadcrumb leading straight to your emotional pressure points. Anyone paying attention can follow that trail. And once someone knows what you fear, crave, or overthink, they gain a subtle leverage over you. Not always intentionally, but inevitably. Oversharing hands people the blueprint to your reactions. Inside, the inner voice insists that openness creates connection. It pushes you to explain yourself, to justify your choices, to narrate your inner world as if transparency guarantees safety. Yet awareness observes the cost. Every unnecessary detail becomes a handle someone could pull later. By speaking too freely, you make your emotional landscape predictable. Predictability invites manipulation. Mystery protects it. When you share less, people have to fill in the gaps, and they do so cautiously. They measure their words. They tread lightly. They treat you as someone with depth they haven't fully mapped. This uncertainty works in your favor. It places you slightly outside their control, slightly beyond their assumptions. Humans respect what they cannot easily categorize, and they hesitate to test someone they cannot fully read. The shift is subtle but profound. Instead of pouring information outward, you begin absorbing it inward. You listen more. You watch more. You allow silence to do the asking for you. The power dynamic flips. Now you hold the informational advantage. And people sense this immediately. Their tone changes, their disclosures slow, their strategies soften. They're suddenly aware that you aren't broadcasting your intentions, which means they must reveal more of theirs. And here's the pivot that leads to the next threshold. If revealing less makes you unshakable, imagine what happens when conflict arrives and your calm cannot be moved. Lean in. Conflict exposes people faster than honesty ever could. The moment tension rises, most minds rush to defend, justify, or dominate. Voices tighten. Breathing shortens. The atmosphere fills with invisible sparks. But when you remain calm in that same moment, not dismissive, not frozen, simply steady, everything shifts. Your composure becomes the quiet center of the storm, and others feel that contrast instantly. Calmness doesn't just de-escalate conflict, it redefines the power dynamic. Inside, the inner voice urges you to react. It wants to correct the misunderstanding, prove your point, protect your image. Yet a deeper awareness watches the impulse without obeying it. That awareness understands something the voice doesn't. Emotional predictability is a vulnerability. The person who can be pushed into over-explaining or raising their tone becomes easy to steer. But the one who stays grounded becomes unreadable, untouchable, and unmistakably respected. Think of how human behavior shifts around someone whose calm cannot be provoked. People become more deliberate. They rethink their phrasing. Their emotional strategies lose traction because the usual triggers don't work. Your steady presence becomes a mirror reflecting their agitation back to them. Without effort, you expose the imbalance between your inner stillness and their inner chaos. And humans instinctively respect the one who isn't controlled by the moment. This is where personal power becomes practical. Calmness is not passivity, it's strategy. It lets you observe motives, patterns, and inconsistencies with surgical clarity. It gives you time to choose your response rather than react from habit. Emotional neutrality becomes a form of intelligence, the kind that disarms aggression and elevates the conversation without surrendering your position. People may argue with your ideas, but they cannot argue with your composure. And here is your practice. Pause for one full breath before responding to any form of tension. Let awareness rise before the voice. Let choice come before reaction. Then ask yourself silently, what deserves my energy here? As this doorway opens, another waits behind it. If calmness reshapes conflict, what happens when your words themselves become scarce, precise, and impossibly weight? Ed? There's a quiet authority in someone who speaks with intention. Not intensity, intention. When every word feels chosen rather than spilled, people instinctively lean in. The mind interprets scarcity as value, so when your speech becomes deliberate, your influence expands without you ever raising your voice. A few precise lines land harder than an entire monologue delivered in urgency. Weight isn't in volume, it's in clarity. Inside, the inner voice wants to fill space. It fears misunderstanding, silence, awkward pauses. It pushes you to explain just a little more so no one misreads you. But awareness sees the trap. The more you talk, the more you're giving others to reinterpret, distort, or dismiss. Excess speech weakens impact. Selective speech amplifies it. When you speak less, people assume you've thought more, even when you haven't. Humans are wired to assign significance based on contrast. When most people talk constantly, the one who speaks minimally stands out. Their words feel heavier, sharper, more refined. A simple statement from you can quiet a room because your voice doesn't appear casually. The energy shifts, people start waiting for your input. They begin framing their thoughts around what you might say. This is influence gained through restraint. Thoughtful speech also reshapes how others perceive your judgment. When you speak rarely but clearly, people assume your observations are accurate, your standards high, your decisions intentional. You begin occupying a psychological position of authority, even without claiming it. And once that perception forms, every pause becomes meaningful. Every sentence becomes a moment of gravity. And here's the open door leading to the final truth. If your words carry this much weight, what kind of presence emerges when even your silence commands the room? Powerful presence isn't something you perform, it's something others feel before they understand why. When you enter a room without rushing, shrinking, or seeking cues, the atmosphere adjusts around you. People sit up straighter, voices lower slightly, attention sharpens. It's not intimidation, it's gravity. A quiet center forms around someone who carries internal authority, and others orient themselves to that center without realizing they're doing it. Inside, the inner voice tries to keep you small. It whispers reminders of past mistakes or urges you to match the energy around you. But awareness stands apart, noticing how little effort true presence requires. You don't need to gesture wildly, speak loudly, or command attention. You simply need to occupy your space fully, shoulders relaxed, breath steady, attention grounded. When you're not trying to be anything, you become the one thing no one else can replicate. People instinctively respect the person whose emotions don't leak, whose posture doesn't beg, whose energy doesn't scatter. Quiet presence signals self-direction, the sense that your world has structure independent of anyone else's approval. It makes others measure their tone, reconsider their phrasing, and reveal more than they intended. Your stillness becomes the frame that shapes the entire interaction. Power, at this level, isn't asserted, it's implied. What makes this presence truly magnetic is that it doesn't depend on dominance or force. It's the kind of influence Machiavelli understood but rarely described directly, the rule of gravity rather than the rule of fear. People don't follow you because you demand it, they follow because something in them recognizes the stability you represent. They sense that challenging you requires more internal strength than most are willing to expend. Quiet presence becomes its own form of protection. And now a final question rises, the one that begins the next transformation. If your presence shapes others so effortlessly, what happens when you decide who you become next? Every shift in respect begins inside, in the subtle moments when you stop abandoning yourself and start recognizing the gravity you've carried all along. When awareness steadies, the old patterns fall away, the over-explaining, the softness that cost too much, the chase for validation that never returned its investment. What remains is a quieter posture, not harder, just truer, and people feel that truth before you ever speak it. You don't gain respect by performing strength. You gain it by no longer negotiating your worth. Let this be the turning point, the moment you choose presence over approval, boundaries over noise, intention over impulse. If this resonated, like the video, subscribe for more insight, share it with someone who needs grounding, and comment "Awaken" to anchor the shift. The next revelation waits just beyond this one, and you're ready for it.